but it's 1937. Now in 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act passed. Now this act was drafted by this fucking sex machine right here, Harry J. Anslinger, who was the commissioner for the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. Now, during the congressional hearings for this act, Mr. Anslinger read statements saying that marijuana was more likely to make people commit violent crimes, including rape and murder, and that it also caused insanity. Now, the only person at the congressional hearings that stood against the federal government's claims was a doctor, Dr. William C. Woodward, who was representing the American Medical Association. Now, this isn't actually a picture of him because I couldn't find one, but this guy's name also happens to be Woodward, and he was a doctor. So, close enough in my mind, and in the spirit of aesthetically pleasing commentary, this will have to do. But anyway, Dr. Woodward testified that there was no evidence to any of the claims made by the government, and he stated, "To say, however, as has been proposed here, that the use of the drug should be prevented by a prohibitive tax, loses sight of the fact that future investigation may show that there are substantial medical uses for cannabis." He was also bothered by the fact that this bill wasn't made aware to the medical world by saying, quote, "We cannot understand yet, Mr. Chairman, why this bill should have been prepared in secret for 2 years, without any intimation even to the profession that it was being prepared." After that, they pretty much told him to shut the hell up, and that if he didn't have anything nice to say about the prohibiting of marijuana, then why did he come at all? And just like that, his testimony went completely unacknowledged, and the congressional hearing turned its attention to the other doctor there, Dr. James C. Munch. Once again, could not find a picture, it doesn't matter. Now, Dr. Munch's big contribution to this field was the fact that he had injected an extract of cannabis into the brains of 300 dogs, and 2 of them had died. Now, at this hearing, I don't feel like they asked him important enough questions, such as, why in the fuck would you inject THC into the brain of a dog? Did this sexually arouse you? Are you even a doctor? How many fingers is this many fingers? Those are important questions never asked. Dr. Munch then went on to state that marijuana will completely disintegrate a human being's personality, and that it will also cause violent irritability. But then he actually added, he can't speak for humans, only animals, and that marijuana will completely disintegrate a dog's personality. But then he concluded all of this with, but I'm actually not a dog psychologist. Now, if that doesn't make any fucking sense, I've got another one for you. Dr. Munch went on to become the official expert on marijuana for the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, who stated in court that he had to smoke marijuana once in order to test its dangerous effects on himself. Then he stated under oath, quote, "After 2 puffs on a marijuana cigarette, I was turned into a bat." What? I'm sorry. Come again? Did you say what? I guess it all makes sense though. That goes to show that Batman was around long before Gotham City. Funnier still is this man remained the US official expert on marijuana from 1938 until 1962. And after the congressional hearings, this bill went to the floor of the House for them to be able to debate on it. It took them 90 seconds to debate on this monumental bill and sign it, mostly due to the fact that the Speaker of the House lied to everyone and said that the American Medical Association was in favor of it, and boom, just like that, after the president signed it, it's illegal. And the funny part is there's actually no recorded voting on it at all. There's just no record of it at all. Now, there are a couple theories as to how this became a law, with no government evidence supporting their claim, and with the American Medical Association not being in favor of it. Here's one theory. See, hemp was very readily available, and with the technology of the time, it was becoming easier and cheaper to process into clothing, paper, and plastics. And then there was a company named DuPont. And DuPont is big in the chemical-based synthetic field. They're big in plastic and paper, and big in a new creation by them in 1935 called nylon. So if hemp was becoming cheaper and it was easily available, they were a big competitor. So how could they get rid of competition? Well, there's one way. One of DuPont's biggest financial backers was the Mellon Bank, which today is called the Bank of New York Mellon after a merger with the New York Bank. And Andrew Mellon was the president of the Mellon Bank until his brother took over for him so he could become the Secretary of the Treasury for the United States. And in 1930, Andrew Mellon appointed Harry J. Anslinger as the Commissioner of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. Mr. Anslinger then went on to demonize marijuana and drafted the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, as well as campaigning for the Uniform Narcotics Act of 1932, cueing a man named William Randolph Hearst who had extensive timber holdings. So if hemp became cheaper to use for paper than wood, it would affect him as well. But not only did Hearst have timber holdings, he also owned the largest newspaper and magazine business in the world. Thus, he became one of the biggest spreaders of propaganda for the evils of marijuana. Here's an article.
By the tons it is coming into this country. The deadly, dreadful poison that racks and tears not only the body, but the very heart and soul of every human being who once becomes a slave to it, in any of its cruel and devastating forms. Marijuana is a shortcut to the insane asylum. Smoke marijuana cigarettes for a month, and once your brain will be nothing but a storehouse of horrid specters. Hashish makes a murderer who kills for the love of killing out of the mildest-mannered man who ever laughed at the idea that any habit could ever get him.
So if these guys found a way to make cannabis illegal, it would also make hemp illegal, because hemp is a strain of the plant Cannabis sativa. Now, even though all of this is very, very convincing and interesting, I still can't hold it up as the reason because it is still nonetheless a theory and there's not enough evidence to back it up. What was proven was something else entirely. Racism. See, during the Mexican Revolution, many Mexicans came over who opposed the fighting or wanted to get out of the fighting, so they immigrated to the United States. But then came the Great Depression of 1929, and people needed someone to blame for the horrible economy, so they blamed President Herbert Hoover. But Hoover was like, nah, I don't like that. So he used the Mexicans as scapegoats, saying that they had come over and they had stolen jobs and they had used social services. Sound familiar? But here's the comedic part, right? In the 1880s, the federal government passed the Chinese Exclusion Act. Now, the Chinese Exclusion Act banned Chinese immigration. This was due to the fact that the American population were in an outrage for unemployment, so they decided to blame the Chinese. And in a country completely founded on immigrants, some immigrants decided, well, other immigrants just aren't white enough. So Chinese immigration stopped. But then the economy started to pick back up, and there's not enough cheap immigrant labor to be found anywhere. But wait a minute, what's this? What's this? Oh, how easy it will be. Direct requests were made to the President of Mexico to send over more and more Mexicans. Not to mention aggressive recruiters were hired to go into Mexico to bring over Mexicans to fill shortages. But in 1929, with the bad economy and people needed someone to blame, with the president's backing, people went into the cities and started rounding Mexicans up on buses, trains, and ships and deporting them back to Mexico, while others were persuaded kindly to leave. Over 2 million Mexicans were deported in what was known as Mexican repatriation. But it gets better, you see, because over half of the Mexicans deported were here legally, because either they were born here or they were asked to come over. But the Hoover administration argued that it was easier to deport Mexicans than any other group of immigrants because Mexico was closer. Never mind the fact that every single person in this country can trace their lineage back to immigration. Fuck it, it doesn't matter. So Mexicans are now stereotyped as an evil group of alien beings. Now marijuana ties into this because marijuana was largely brought over for recreational use at the turn of the 20th century by Mexican immigrants. The word marijuana itself is a slang word for cannabis coined by Mexicans, and it wasn't even widely used until the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. Also, poor minorities started using marijuana as a recreational drug, and we all know that in this era, tolerance wasn't high up on a list of virtues. So if marijuana could be linked to blacks and Mexicans, then it must be evil, as is evident by the quotes of Harry J. Anslinger of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. There are 100,000 total marijuana smokers smokers in the US, and most are Negroes, Hispanics, Filipinos, and entertainers. Their satanic music, jazz, and swing result from marijuana usage. This marijuana causes white women to seek sexual relations with Negroes, entertainers, and any others. Reefer makes darkies think they're as good as white men. The primary reason to outlaw marijuana is its effect on the degenerate races. And even today, although the use of marijuana between blacks and whites is about equal, and the use by Hispanics is actually lower, Hispanics are twice as likely to be arrested, and blacks are 3 times as likely to be arrested than whites. But I digress. Back on subject. So if you mix the racist attitude of Harry J. Anslinger and the racist propaganda from William Randolph Hearst, who as early as 23 showed feelings of superiority over Mexicans by sending a letter to his mother stating, I really don't see what is to prevent us from owning all Mexico and running it to suit ourselves. Then you have a better understanding. Also another story of Hearst's. Was it marijuana, the new Mexican drug, that nerved the murderous arm of Clara Phillips when she hammered out her victim's life in Los Angeles? 3/4 of the crimes of violence in this country today are committed by dope slaves. That is a matter of cold record. And also during the Mexican Revolution, Pancho Villa and his irregulars had appropriated close to 1 million acres of Hearst's family's land. So he was pretty pissed off by it, and he really didn't like Mexicans too much because of that. So if marijuana is ingrained in the culture of minorities and the culture of immigrants, then it would be very beneficial to a community who was hateful towards them to make it illegal. And on top of that, it was up to the discretion of the police officer on who to arrest. And on top of that, reefer madness and other government-backed ads scared the shit out of people.
These high school boys and girls are having a hop at the local soda fountain. Innocently they dance. Innocent of a new and deadly menace lurking behind closed doors. Marijuana, the burning weed with its roots in hell. In this film, you will see the ease with which this vicious plant can be grown in your neighbor's yard, rolled into harmless-looking cigarettes, hidden in an innocent shoe or watch case.
If you want a good smoke, try one of these.
You will meet Bill, who once took pride in his strong will as he takes the first step toward enslavement.
Of course, if you're afraid.
Smoking the soul-destroying reefer, they find a moment's pleasure, but at a terrible price. Debauchery, violence, murder, suicide, and the ultimate end of the marijuana addict. Hopeless insanity. See this important film now, before it is too late.
Let's fast forward to 1969. 1969! Now in 1969 there was the Supreme Court case, Larry vs. United States, which declared that the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 was unconstitutional because it violated the Fifth Amendment of self-incrimination. See, to give a better backstory is to understand that the federal government knew that it had no authority in making drugs or alcohol illegal according to the Constitution. The 10th Amendment reiterates that fact, stating, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people." And the Constitution gave the federal government no rights in making things like this illegal, and they knew it. That's why in 1919 they had to make a constitutional amendment in order to prohibit alcohol. So the government couldn't just come out and say, "Hey, marijuana's illegal. And the Marijuana Tax Act didn't even make the use of marijuana illegal. All it did was it levied a tax because the federal government is a crafty son of a bitch. And under the taxing and spending clause of the Constitution, the federal government is allowed to tax people. So all they did is they took the marijuana and said, hey, you want to buy, sell, distribute, or possess marijuana? You need to pay your taxes first. Okay, seems simple enough, right? Just go ahead and get a tax stamp. No, see, it wasn't that easy because it was a paradoxical law, a catch-22. In order to obtain the marijuana tax stamp, you had to submit the marijuana so they could weigh it and know how much to tax you. But in order to have the marijuana in the first place, you had to have the tax stamp. So you'd go in and say, here's my marijuana, tell me how much I owe you. And they say, wait a minute. You have marijuana. Where's the tax stamp? And you say, I don't know. That's what I'm trying to fucking get from you. What are you doing to me? My fucking head's gonna explode because that doesn't make any sense. And they're like, well, sorry. So the federal government started imprisoning people for the possession of marijuana. Not because marijuana was a dangerous drug. No, they did it because it was tax evasion. Because people hadn't paid their taxes on it. So the Larry v. United States Supreme Court case ruled the unconstitutionality of this law. Because in order to obtain the stamp, you had to commit a crime and incriminate yourself. So in 1970, the Marijuana Tax Act was repealed, but then replaced with our current law, the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act, signed into effect by President Nixon. And Title II of this act is the Controlled Substances Act, or the CSA for short. And with the CSA came the enormous expansion of federal police power, as well as the expansion of federal drug laws. Now, under the CSA, marijuana is listed as a Schedule I controlled substance, meaning it is looked at as one of the worst drugs in the United States. And there today it still sits right next to heroin. Cocaine is actually a Schedule II. Now, in order for a drug to become a Schedule I controlled substance, it has to fall under 3 guidelines. 1, the drug has to have a high potential for abuse. 2, the drug has to have no currently accepted medical uses. And 3, there has to be a lack of accepted safety for use of the drug under medical supervision. Now, of course we know that there is a problem with this, because currently, 16 states, including Washington, D.C., the fucking capital of our country, allow medicinal marijuana, which brings about a problem. Firstly, that throws out the second point that medical marijuana has no accepted medical use. And secondly, that also means that medical marijuana is both legal in those states, but illegal according to the federal government. So how can something be both legal and illegal? What does that mean? Will judges start committing suicide in fear of their brains exploding upon trying this case? How can medical marijuana be both legal and illegal? Well, in 2005, in a case called Reich vs. Gonzalez, they asked just that. After the DEA came into California and destroyed a patient's 6 medical marijuana plants. Can't have that. Now, medical marijuana has been legal in California since 1996. And Angel Reich, the defendant, used medical marijuana under doctor's orders. And her doctor stated in court that without marijuana, she would die, as it curbed her seizures and pain due to an inoperable brain tumor and chemotherapy. Now, she also has wasting syndrome, which renders her with no appetite and will make her lose weight until death. Marijuana not only helps with her appetite, but also helps with the pain, and she is allergic to many other types of medication. Now, she argued that even though the CSA had made medical marijuana illegal federally, the state of California had made it legal. So therefore, since this all happened in the state of California, the federal government had no jurisdiction. And according to the 9th and 10th Amendments, the people had the right to decide. And the Supreme Court said, like hell you do, and ruled in favor of the federal government, and said that the federal government had the power to arrest and prosecute medical marijuana patients, even where states have legalized it. And they said that this was because of the Commerce Clause in the Constitution. The Commerce Clause states that the Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. Yep. That's it. One sentence. That one sentence has been the backbone of federal expansion. And then, once they interpret that to mean whatever the hell they want because it's so easy to call anything commerce, well then they use the necessary and proper clause to make a law on it. The Congress shall have power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States, or in any department or officer thereof. And then you have the Supremacy Clause, which states that federal law shall be the supreme law of the land. Now that was all fine and dandy back when the Constitution was made, because the federal government had limited power, and they knew that. But now, the federal government has interpreted all of these laws, clauses, and amendments to suit themselves. Mix in the Supremacy Clause, and it's fucking dangerous, because that means the federal government has supreme control over everything. And now there are people sitting in jail and prison because of this law. There are drug cartels that have taken over entire fucking countries because of this law. Because the CSA left out any room for debate. Since in 1970 there was no medical use and there was a high rate of abuse, that's how it is. They didn't put a clause in there that said, well, if something changes you can fix it. And nowadays people can't just look at it and say, well, we know a little bit more about it. It's got medical use. Yeah, let's fix it. No, you can't use common sense with the law, apparently. So you have to go through a stupid fucking procedure. But it's actually a little easier than you think, because currently right now, but you will be put in jail or prison, or you'll have to pay us a fine. Can you think about that? You have to pay them a fine in order to put something into your body. There are 313 million of us. I think we've got them outnumbered. We can do it.